On March 5, 2009, Michael Jackson stood on a stage at the O2 Arena in London and announced what would be his final concert series. 50 shows all at the same venue, beginning on July 13th, 2009. He called it "This Is It," and the announcement was met with extraordinary demand. Tickets sold out within hours, crashing the venue's website and breaking records for the fastest-selling concerts in history. Fans around the world saw it as a triumphant return, a chance to see the King of Pop perform one last time. Jackson himself spoke of the shows as a farewell to his live performing career, a final gift to his fans. But behind the carefully orchestrated announcement and the spectacular ticket sales, a different story was unfolding. Jackson was 50 years old, deeply in debt, and according to those who worked with him during the rehearsal period, struggling with physical and mental health issues that raised serious questions about whether he would be able to perform even one show, let alone 50. Less than 4 months after the announcement, on June 25th, 2009, Michael Jackson was dead. The This Is It tour never happened. What did happen in those final months during the intense rehearsal period at the Staples Center in Los Angeles has been the subject of investigation, speculation, and conflicting accounts ever since. The decision to undertake the This Is It tour was not purely artistic. Jackson's financial situation in 2009 was dire. He was hundreds of millions of dollars in debt, facing the possibility of losing Neverland Ranch and other assets. His spending had always been extravagant, but in the years following his 2005 acquittal on child molestation charges, his income had dried up while his expenses remained astronomical. He had borrowed heavily against future earnings, and those loans were coming due. The This Is It concerts, promoted by AEG Live, were intended to solve these financial problems. The deal was complex, involving guarantees, advances, and projections of revenue from ticket sales, merchandise, and potential film rights. Jackson stood to make a significant amount of money if the shows were successful, enough to pay off his debts and restore his financial stability. But the contract also placed enormous pressure on him to deliver, and the consequences of failure would have been catastrophic. Rehearsals for This Is It began in earnest in April 2009, though planning and creative development had been underway for months before that. The rehearsals took place primarily at the Staples Center in downtown Los Angeles, a massive venue that could accommodate the scale of production Jackson envisioned. The show was designed to be a spectacle, incorporating elaborate sets, cutting-edge visual effects, a large ensemble of dancers, and a live band. Jackson was involved in every aspect of the production, from selecting songs and choreographing routines to approving costume designs and stage effects. By all accounts, he was creatively engaged and eager to make the show a success. But those same accounts also describe a man who was physically frail, often late to rehearsals, and increasingly reliant on medications to manage pain and insomnia. The rehearsal schedule was grueling, particularly for someone in Jackson's condition. Sessions often ran late into the night, with Jackson and the crew working until 2 or 3 in the morning. The production team, led by director Kenny Ortega, was under intense pressure from AEG Live to ensure that the show would be ready for the July 13th opening. There were concerns from the beginning about whether the timeline was realistic, but those concerns were overridden by the financial and contractual obligations. Jackson was expected to attend rehearsals regularly to learn complex choreography and to perform at a level consistent with his legendary reputation. For a 50-year-old man with a history of health problems, this was a daunting challenge. Witness accounts from the rehearsal period paint a troubling picture. Several members of the production team, including dancers, musicians, and technical staff, later testified or gave statements describing Jackson as appearing weak, disoriented, and unwell. Some said he seemed to have difficulty remembering choreography that he would have executed flawlessly in his younger years. Others noted that he was often cold, even when the rehearsal space was warm, and that he sometimes wore multiple layers of clothing. There were days when Jackson did not show up to rehearsals at all, leaving the cast and crew waiting for hours. When he did appear, he was sometimes energetic and focused, performing with flashes of the brilliance that had made him famous. But at other times, he seemed barely able to stand, his movement slow and his voice weak. Kenny Ortega, who had worked with Jackson on previous tours and considered him a friend, became increasingly concerned as the rehearsals progressed. According to later testimony and emails that became public during legal proceedings, Ortega expressed alarm about Jackson's physical and mental state. In one email sent to AEG Live executives on June 20, 2009, just 5 days before Jackson's death, Ortega wrote that Jackson had exhibited signs of paranoia, anxiety, and obsessive behavior. He described an incident in which Jackson had appeared so ill that Ortega had sent him home, insisting that he needed to see a doctor. Ortega's email suggested that Jackson was in no condition to perform, and that pushing him to continue could have serious consequences. AEG Live's response to these concerns has been a matter of significant dispute. According to documents and testimony from the wrongful death lawsuit filed by Jackson's family against AEG, the company was aware of Jackson's declining health, but prioritized the financial investment and the looming deadline over his well-being. Executives allegedly pressured Jackson's personal physician, Dr. Conrad Murray, to get Jackson to rehearsals regardless of his condition. Murray, who had been hired by Jackson but whose salary was being paid by AEG, was caught in a conflict of interest. He was supposed to be caring for Jackson's health, but he was also under pressure to ensure that Jackson could perform. This dynamic, according to the Jackson family's lawsuit, created a situation in which Murray prioritized keeping Jackson functional over keeping him safe. Dr. Conrad Murray's role in Jackson's final months is central to understanding what happened. Murray was a cardiologist who had been treating Jackson since 2006. In May 2009, Jackson asked Murray to accompany him to London for the This Is It tour, offering him a salary of $150,000 per month. Murray agreed, closing his medical practices to devote himself full-time to Jackson. But Murray's treatment of Jackson during this period went far beyond conventional medical care. According to Murray's own later testimony and evidence presented at his criminal trial, he was administering propofol, a powerful anesthetic used in surgical settings, to help Jackson sleep. Propofol is not a sleep aid. It induces unconsciousness, and its use outside of a hospital is extraordinarily dangerous. Murray was giving Jackson propofol almost every night in the bedroom of Jackson's rented mansion in Holmby Hills, often in combination with other sedatives like lorazepam and midazolam. The use of propofol in this context was not only medically inappropriate, but also indicative of how desperate Jackson had become. Insomnia had plagued him for years, a byproduct of stress, chronic pain, and possibly the long-term effects of medication use. As the pressure of the This Is It rehearsals intensified, Jackson's sleep problems worsened. He told Murray that he needed to sleep, that he could not function without rest, and that nothing else worked. Murray, who should have recognized the danger and refused, instead complied, administering the drug and attempting to monitor Jackson through the night. But propofol requires constant professional monitoring, specialized equipment, and the ability to respond immediately if the patient stops breathing. Murray had none of these safeguards in place. Rehearsal footage from the final weeks, some of which was later included in the posthumous This Is It documentary film, shows Jackson performing with moments of his old magic. There are clips of him dancing, singing, and directing the production with precision and passion. But those clips were carefully selected. They do not show the full picture of Jackson's condition. Members of the crew have said that for every moment of brilliance captured on film, there were hours of struggle, of Jackson appearing exhausted, confused, or in pain. The documentary, released by AEG and Jackson's estate in October 2009, was designed to celebrate Jackson's artistry and to generate revenue. It was not designed to document the reality of his final days, and critics have argued that it sanitized the truth, presenting a version of events that obscured the warning signs and the negligence that contributed to his death. On June 23, 2009, 2 days before his death, Jackson attended what would be his final full rehearsal at the Staples Center. According to those who were present, he seemed more engaged than he had been in recent days. He performed several songs, including Earth Song and Billie Jean, and he worked with the crew on staging and lighting. Some members of the production team later said that this rehearsal gave them hope. that Jackson seemed to be rallying, that perhaps the show would happen after all. But others noted that even on this night, Jackson appeared thin and frail, his energy fluctuating, his stamina limited. He left the Staples Center late that night and returned to his home in Holmby Hills. June 24th, 2009 was Jackson's last full day alive. He had a rehearsal scheduled for that evening, and he attended, though accounts of his condition vary. Some say he was in good spirits, others that he seemed tired. He worked on a few numbers, spent time with the dancers and musicians, and left around midnight. He went home, and according to Dr. Murray's later testimony, he was unable to sleep. Murray attempted to help him using various sedatives, but nothing worked. Finally, in the early hours of June 25th, Murray administered propofol. What happened next is a matter of record. Murray left Jackson unattended, made phone calls, and when he returned, Jackson was not breathing. Murray's attempts to revive him were inadequate and delayed. By the time paramedics arrived and transported Jackson to UCLA Medical Center, it was too late. Michael Jackson was pronounced dead at 2:26 p.m. on June 25, 2009. The immediate aftermath of Jackson's death was chaotic. News of his passing spread rapidly, causing shock and grief around the world. Fans gathered outside the hospital, outside his home, and at landmarks associated with his life and career. The media coverage was relentless, with every detail of his final hours scrutinized. Within days, the focus turned to Dr. Conrad Murray and the circumstances of Jackson's death. The Los Angeles County Coroner's Office conducted an autopsy and toxicology tests which revealed that Jackson had died from acute propofol intoxication, with other sedatives contributing. The coroner ruled the death a homicide, meaning it was caused by the actions of another person. The investigation into Jackson's death led to criminal charges against Dr. Murray. He was charged with involuntary manslaughter, accused of administering propofol in a reckless manner, and of failing to provide adequate care. Murray's trial, which took place in late 2011, provided a detailed account of Jackson's final night. Prosecutors presented evidence of Murray's negligence, including his failure to call 911 immediately, his inadequate attempts at CPR, and his decision to administer propofol in a home setting without proper equipment. Murray's defense argued that Jackson had self-administered a fatal dose of propofol while Murray was out of the room, but this claim was undermined by expert testimony and the physical evidence. Murray was convicted and sentenced to 4 years in prison, though he served only 2. The criminal trial against Murray answered some questions about how Jackson died, but it left many others unresolved. Why had Jackson become so dependent on propofol? Why had Murray agreed to administer it in such dangerous conditions? And what role, if any, had AEG Live and the pressures of the This Is It tour played in creating the circumstances that led to Jackson's death? These questions were explored in the civil wrongful death lawsuit filed by Jackson's mother, Katherine Jackson, against AEG Live in 2013. The lawsuit alleged that AEG had negligently hired Murray, that the company had ignored warning signs about Jackson's health, and that the financial pressure and tight timeline had contributed to his death. The AEG trial, which lasted 5 months, revealed extensive details about the This Is It production and Jackson's final weeks. Emails between AEG executives showed that the company was aware of Jackson's struggles and had expressed frustration about his missed rehearsals and erratic behavior. Some emails suggested that AEG viewed Jackson as a financial asset that needed to be managed and controlled, rather than as a person whose health and safety should be prioritized. Other emails showed executives discussing the need to get Murray to get Jackson to rehearsals, and expressing concern about the financial losses if the tour were delayed or canceled. The defense argued that AEG had no way of knowing about Murray's use of propofol, and that Jackson, as an adult, was responsible for his own medical decisions. The jury ultimately sided with AEG, finding that while the company had hired Murray, they were not liable for his actions because they could not have foreseen that he would administer propofol in such a reckless manner. The outcome of the AEG trial did not satisfy those who believed that the company bore significant responsibility for Jackson's death. Critics pointed to the emails, the testimony about the pressure placed on Jackson, and the systemic issues that allowed a dangerous situation to develop unchecked. They argued that the pursuit of profit had overridden concerns for Jackson's well-being, and that the tragedy could have been prevented if AEG had been more attentive to the warning signs. Supporters of AEG countered that Jackson was a grown man who made his own choices, that he had sought out propofol and had pressured Murray to provide it, and that the company could not be held responsible for a doctor's medical malpractice. The This Is It documentary film, released in October 2009, became the highest-grossing documentary of all time, earning over $260 million worldwide. It provided fans with a glimpse of what the shows might have been, showcasing Jackson's talent and dedication, even in his final days. But the film was also controversial. Critics argued that it was exploitative, that it profited from Jackson's death while glossing over the conditions that led to it. The film included a disclaimer stating that it was compiled from rehearsal footage and that it was not intended to be a complete or accurate representation of the rehearsal process. But for many viewers, it was the primary source of information about Jackson's final months, and it shaped their understanding of what had happened. The physical and mental toll that the This Is It rehearsals took on Jackson is difficult to quantify but clearly significant. Medical experts who reviewed the evidence from the trials and the autopsy noted that Jackson was underweight, suffering from chronic insomnia, and dependent on multiple medications. His body showed signs of wear from decades of performing, including joint problems and old injuries that had never fully healed. The demands of preparing for 50 concerts, each requiring hours of choreography and vocal performance, would have been challenging for a healthy performer in peak physical condition. For Jackson, who was neither healthy nor in peak condition, the demands were overwhelming. The question of whether Jackson could have performed the This Is It shows, even if he had lived, remains a matter of speculation. Some who worked with him during the rehearsals believed that with proper rest and medical care, he could have pulled it off, that his talent and determination would have carried him through. Others were more skeptical, noting that the decline they witnessed in his final weeks suggested that he was in no condition to sustain a demanding performance schedule. The fact that the opening night was postponed from July 13th to July 26th, ostensibly to allow for more rehearsal time, suggested that the production team was aware that Jackson was not ready. The legacy of This Is It is complicated. It stands as a testament to Jackson's artistry and his commitment to his craft, even in the face of overwhelming challenges. But it also stands as a cautionary tale about the pressures of fame, the exploitation of artists by the entertainment industry, and the dangers of prioritizing financial gain over human well-being. The rehearsal footage shows a man who was still capable of brilliance, but it also shows a man who was struggling, who needed help, and who did not receive the care and protection he deserved. The final days of Michael Jackson's life were marked by a collision of forces: his own desperation to overcome his financial troubles, the demands of a massive production, the enabling behavior of his physician, and the commercial interests of a powerful entertainment company. Each of these forces contributed to the circumstances that led to his death. Jackson wanted to perform, to prove that he was still the king of pop, to give his fans one last spectacular show. But his body and mind were no longer capable of meeting those expectations, and the people around him, who should have recognized this and intervened, either did not see the danger or chose to ignore it. In the years since Jackson's death, the This Is It era has been re-examined through various lenses. Documentaries, books, and investigative reports have explored the rehearsal period, the relationships between the key players, and the decisions that were made. Some have focused on Dr. Murray and his culpability, portraying him as a doctor who violated his oath and prioritized money over his patient's life. Others have focused on AEG Live and the entertainment industry's tendency to treat artists as commodities. And still others have focused on Jackson himself, on his choices, his dependencies, and the ways in which his own behavior contributed to his tragic end. The truth, as is often the case, is likely a combination of all of these perspectives. Jackson was a victim of circumstances, but he was also a participant in them. He sought out propofol, he pressured Murray to provide it, and he made choices that put his health at risk. But he was also a man under immense pressure, a man who had been exploited and controlled for much of his life, and a man who was surrounded by people who had financial and professional interests in seeing him perform. The failure to protect him was collective, and the responsibility for his death cannot be placed on any single individual or entity. The mystery of Jackson's final days is not so much about what happened, but about why no one stopped it. The warning signs were there. The emails, the testimony, the visible decline, all pointed to a man in crisis. But the mechanisms that should have intervened, the checks and balances that should have protected him, did not function. The doctor who should have said no kept saying yes. The production company that should have prioritized his health prioritized the schedule. And Jackson himself, who should have sought help, sought instead a chemical solution to a problem that required rest, therapy, and time. The result was a tragedy that was both shocking and, in hindsight, painfully predictable. Michael Jackson's death at the age of 50 robbed the world of an artist whose influence on music, dance, and popular culture was unparalleled. It also robbed his 3 children of their father and left unanswered questions about what might have been if the This Is It tour had succeeded. The rehearsal footage, the testimony, and the investigations provide pieces of the puzzle, but the full picture of those final months remains elusive, obscured by conflicting accounts, legal maneuvering, and the passage of time. What is clear is that the This Is It era was not just about a concert series that never happened. It was about a man pushed to his limits, a system that failed to protect him, and a tragedy that, with different choices and better care, might have been avoided. The final rehearsals, the last performances, the desperate attempts to sleep, and the fatal dose of propofol on June 25, 2009, all form a story that continues to resonate, a reminder of the human cost of fame and the fragility of life.